Welcome back to Lee Anderson's Real World. Time for right versus left. We've got the very gorgeous, the very lovely, the very beautiful Andy McDonald and the legendary
that
Emma
old
Webb.
chestnut.
That old chestnut. Look, politics is changing over the past few years. I spoke about this earlier, and our voting system, I think, needs personally reforming a little bit. We saw all sorts of accusations with the Rochdale by-election with postal votes. Andy, is it time to scrap postal votes?
I don't think scrapping postal votes, but I'd say reforming the way that they're distributed and the people who are allowed to vote by post. I think the restrictions that have been put in by the Conservative government on voter ID should be applied to postal voting more than anything, because that's where the actual cases of fraud happen.
With the voter ID, do you agree with turning up with a photo at the polling station?
I agree with it in principle, but I think the way that it's been done is it's been left to the returning officers. They've been left on their own to kind of administer it how they want. So I think there needs to be a more coherent strategy on it, and it needs to be done on postal votes if you're going to do it at all, because that's where the only real cases of fraud happen. You're fighting the wrong fire.
Yeah, but people in the Labour Party will say there's no fraud happens with postal voting. Prove it.
What do you mean people in the Labour Party? People in the Labour Party say lots of things. People in the Conservative Party say lots of people in the Reform Party. You've been in all three and you say lots of things, Lee. So,
postal votes. Should we scrap them?
Not entirely, because I think older people who are not able to physically get to a polling station should be able to vote by post. I agree with you that I also agree with voter ID, and I think that you should have to prove who you are when you're voting. I think that there should be serious restrictions around the way that postal voting is used, because it's an obvious vulnerable point for the democratic system to be abused. It's obviously vulnerable to that, because you could have a situation where the head of a household votes on behalf of their entire household, where people are pressured into voting in certain ways. You could have a situation in which the people who are voting are not really the people who are voting, or the people who are having votes cast on their behalf don't even necessarily speak English. So it's obviously vulnerable to abuse in that way. I think it's surprising that the Electoral Commission didn't seem particularly interested in looking into what happened in Rochdale. I imagine that system has been abused many times before, but particularly as we see this increase in sectarian politics, and particularly certain cultures that are very patriarchal in the very real sense of having one head of the household and possibly having people in that household who don't speak English, who do have a right to vote. We need to look very carefully about reforming the postal vote system to make sure that our democracies are being abused.
So, Andy, we see the Rochdale by-election. People are still talking about it now. With the postal votes, people are suggesting that there's some shenanigans gone off there. I mean, these areas, like Rochdale, are traditional Labour heartlands, and we know it in the inner cities, in places like Leicester and London and places like that. This is, we've had our suspicions for a while that this sort of postal voting fraud, if you like, has happened over years. And Labour sort of turned a blind eye to it, says, no, it doesn't happen. Is it going to affect them now?
I don't think it'll affect them any other way, than it'd affect the Reform Party.
Well, I'm thinking if George Galloway stands, if he does stand candidate.
If George Galloway stood against a proper Labour candidate, he wouldn't have won. If he stood against the late Tony Lloyd in Rochdale, he would have lost. Yeah. Let's be honest, George, it's one-term George. He goes in when there's a big fuss, when there's a gap, and sometimes he wins. He won this one because there wasn't a real Labour candidate. The Labour candidate came fourth, there wasn't real opposition. So I don't think it will. George Galloway's a one-off. Forget his 300 other candidates that he's going to stand.
He says a real Labour candidate. What if somebody like Angela Rayner stood against George in Rochdale? Who would win?
No, George Galloway, because he was mobilising the Muslim vote in response to a very particular contentious issue, Israel and Palestine. He was very clear that that's what he was doing, that he was campaigning on that one issue, because the Labour Party are now vulnerable to candidates like that because of the position that they take on what's happening between Israel and Gaza.
Okay, so look, we're going to go to the yes-no quiz now, and you know the rules, Emma. It's a simple yes or no. Andy, you've done this a few times, haven't you?
Yes.
I think you got 5 out of 5 last time, didn't you?
I did.
Wrong answer. I'm on a joke. Right, we're going to start with you first, Emma. Frank Esler's comments about Diane Abbott, were they racist?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Andy, should the Prime Minister return Hessler's donations?
No.
Well.
No.
No controversy there. Emma, should Boris Johnson make a political comeback?
Yeah.
No.
And Andy, last question. Should trans women be banned from female sports?
No.
No is a wrong answer. That's a wrong answer.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Andy. You're doing so well.
You
You got 4. There's hesitation. Emma, you got 5 out of 5. Well done. Common sense there. Do you want to go back on one, Andy?
Yeah, I think I'll go back on the Boris Johnson political comeback. You know, it's been someone wrote. I think it was in the Times a couple of days ago.
Oh,
that
you read the
he's-
Times these
I do.
days, do you?
I do paper reviews on GB News, which you can watch on Monday nights. You know, and I did read it in fact, and said he was going to go out campaigning with Rishi, and it was going to be that winning duo all over again.
Who said that?
Stephen Swinford, I think it was. He was the author. I thought it was rubbish. We don't need another older Tony and Oxford classicist coming out and talking down to people in the Midlands.
What, I'm winning like 80-seat majorities or stuff
80
like
majority.
Well,
I mean,
know-
if only he'd done something with that majority, a government that you were.
But he's sort of lost the argument there, I think, Emma. It's talked about Etonian campaigning in working class areas.
Well, you were talking about the posh boys in working class
He did
areas.
wrong last time, didn't
You were
he?
talking about the posh boys in working class areas when you went to your third party in 6 years. You know, you were talking about working class people.
Boris is charismatic. Like I do think that we have a problem, and we saw this with the bringing back of David Cameron. We see this in the constant remaking of old films, and we saw last night that they're actually going to make a Titanic 2. They're going to build another version of the Titanic, and I think Boris coming back could be a little bit like that. But you know, our politics needs a little bit of something injected into it, and I don't think that there's anything obvious that should preclude Boris from coming back, particularly given that his premiership was during COVID. He didn't really get much of a chance to.
No, he didn't get a fair
do
crack
what
at
we
the
all
whip, did
hoped he would
Yeah,
do.
he didn't get a fair crack at the whip. But politics these
and
days...
being very generous.
Politics these days, Andy, is almost like a soap opera. I know friends and family now who don't watch Corrie or Emmerdale. They're watching
PMQs.
stations like PMQs and GB News and other stations. Because the politics is live now in people's living rooms. They're actually living and breathing it each day. Is that been a good thing, do you think?
I think it's definitely got pros and cons. You know, ever since kind of the Brexit vote, where there was a mass mobilisation of just normal people about something they cared about, since that 2016 vote, it's a lot of people have had a lot to say, and it's not a bad thing, but sometimes people do take it.
But
too
it can
far.
be bad for your mental health, can't it, politics?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I used to scream at the TV before I got into politics.
Well, it's. I think a lot of people feel very disappointed, and it's frustrating because nothing seems to change. And if you're in it for a long time, or you're paying very, very sort of solid attention to it for a long time, you do sort of want to smash your
Yeah,
face.
you want to pay attention, don't you? Unfortunately, Andy, you weren't paying attention during the yes/no quiz. You got a miserable paltry 4. It's simple. It's simple stuff, my friend. Andy, pathetic score, 4 out of 5. You need to go to the Stephen Pound School of yes/no quizzing. Emma, brilliant. 5 out of 5 again. Superb. She's the winner. Thanks, Emma.